Hey, hello, my friends. It is Sunday, February 2nd, and I have a number of interesting stories for you, and they all kind of revolve around this question. Is Trump Putin's pawn, or is Trump doing something else that's unrelated to what Putin wants, or is Trump doing what he's doing independently, and it just happens to coincide with where Putin is? And I'm going to lay out the facts and let you decide where we are. Now, even the trade war between the tariffs between that Trump had just put on Canada, Mexico, and China, even that plays into what's going on with Ukraine. It's bizarre, but I'll explain how that works. So here, this is in the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal is a center-right publication. It is hard news is pretty center, and its opinion page leans to the right. But the dumbest trade war in history, says the Wall Street Journal. Okay, so let's start with that premise. What's going on? Okay, so I understand if you say we're going to slap tariffs on you, Mexico, because we don't want this immigration and you're not stopping it. I kind of get that one, but I'm not. Okay, so when I'm explaining things, understand this. When I'm explaining things, I'm not saying this is a good idea because I'm explaining it. I'm saying this is what's happening and this is why they're doing that to explain. Okay, so I understand that one. Whether it's a good idea or not is a secondary issue. Now, Canada, I don't quite understand. So here's Trump announces new tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China, and what happens next. This is in Radio Free Europe. Just a couple of paragraphs. Washington would hit Canada, Mexico, and Mexico with tariffs of 25% on all goods, although Canadian energy products will face a lower 10% tariff. The new tariff also includes 10% levy on goods from China. Okay, it's weird that China is lower than Canada. He said he was imposing them until the flow of migrants and illegal fentanyl into the United States was stopped, although the cause of those issues is widely debated and involves a number of complex factors. The sweeping measures risk igniting a trade war that could significantly damage economies of the targeted countries and the United States, especially as Canada, Mexico, and China look to respond. In preparation for this, the executive order signed by Trump also includes a clause that allows the president to expand the tariffs if a country imposes retaliatory measures on the United States. Do you think that's going to stop them from imposing retaliatory measures? Like, what's Canada going to do? Now, first, it sounds like the ostensible reason for the tariffs will be fentanyl, and that doesn't quite make sense from Canada because the U.S. intercepted 43 pounds of fentanyl coming from Canada last year, and that's 0.2% of the total across the country. So it seems like there's another reason why Trump is doing this to Canada. And I think my speculation is that it's something related to trying to get cut some kind of deal with something, but I'm not sure exactly what it is. Now, it also simultaneously creates kind of a bull in the China shop scenario, and that helps Putin. Whether that helps Putin intentionally or whether that helps Putin just because, like, there's a confluence of factors, that's an open question, and that's what you have to decide. And I can't give you the answer, but I'm trying to help you work through the thinking. So Trump's latest trade offensive targets the United States' top 3 trade partners. Will Canada, Mexico, and China hit back harder? Well, the answer, of course, is yes. Trudeau just announced Canada will impose 25% retaliatory tariffs on $155 billion of U.S. exports. He also indicated that Canada may take non-tariff measures as well, suggesting that Canadians avoid buying American products, taking vacations to the U.S., or instead of doing that, traveling within Canada. Okay, so you had to know that kind of thing was coming. And by the way, I'm not a fan of the Trump administration level USMCA, which displaced NAFTA. I thought NAFTA was a far better plan. Free trade between nations. I'm a free marketeer. I'm a Reagan Republican. Free marketeer. These things are good. And Trump said, this isn't a good deal. We have to have these and they had certain quotas and carve outs for certain things. Okay, it wasn't terrible, but this is kind of pretty terrible. Okay, aside from the general issues about, now this is Lawrence Summers that I'm reading. Lawrence Summers was Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary, okay? And so I'm not a big fan of Summers, but he was spot on in his analysis here, aside from the general issues about Trump's tariff and his economic nationalism strategy. Today, actions against Canada and Mexico are inexplicable and dangerous. Well, there's some reason. There's something motivating that. I'm not sure, like, I don't know if Trump is even thinking, well, Canada could become the 51st state and then you wouldn't have these tariffs. Like, he tweeted something like that out today. First, the tariffs will raise prices on automobiles, gasoline, all kinds of things that people buy. So consumers are going to pay for that. Second, the tariffs are passed on to consumers, and then other firms raise prices to match their competitors' high prices, and this will hurt job creation. He's spot on about that. Third, this will force our allies to retaliate. They just did. Fourth, it's hard to imagine a better way to increase migration on our southern border than by destabilizing the Mexican economy, which it could potentially do. And then fifth, as the opening foreign policy move of a new administration, this punishes our closest allies and rewards our adversaries. It's really bizarre, the attitude that Trump seems to have toward our friends in the world. These actions are an important test for American business community. They know this is not pro-business strategy to promote economic growth. I hope business leaders have the courage to say so. They really need to stand up and push back. Okay, so I don't generally agree with Lawrence Summers, but he's spot on. And then I wouldn't probably agree with Brad Setzer, who is from he's a Council of Foreign Relations senior fellow, and he's saying, rare that I agree with the Wall Street Journal op-ed page. Remember, Wall Street Journal op-ed page is center-right, but they're right about this proposed tariffs on Mexico and Canada. What's striking to me is that they're poorly targeted in Trump's own trade terms. If you care about bilateral trade balances, these aren't the right choices. So let's look at this chart. This thick red line at the bottom is Canada. This skinny red line or orange line at the top is China. So if you're going to try to deal with a trade imbalance, China has a trade imbalance of about 50%. I don't know that the trade imbalance matters that much, frankly. I just don't perceive that to be the boogeyman that people think. I see it as a boogeyman. I don't think it's as big of a thing as people think it is. And so then you have the EU here, and you have Canada here. Like Canada's at the bottom with less than 10% of a trade imbalance. Why are we punishing Canada? Like, what's wrong with us? Okay, so the Council of Foreign Relations is all the way on the left. If you look at the spectrum of things, like, they lean way to the left. And then if you look at, here's Wall Street Journal News is center, Wall Street Journal opinion page is center right. And it seems like everybody left, right, and center, unless you're MAGA right, I mean, like way to the MAGA side, all agrees that this is a really bad idea. It's the dumbest trade war in history. Okay, here's Newsmax, which is, they're not, cheerleading here necessarily, but they're not saying anything bad about it here. President Donald Trump said on Sunday, the sweeping tariffs that he has imposed on Mexico, Canada, and China may cause some pain for America. Well, duh, there's no doubt about that. And then this is interesting. A Reuters Ipsos poll released last week showed Americans were divided on tariffs, 54% opposing new duties on imported goods and 43% in support, with Democrats more opposed and Republicans more supportive. What on earth happened in the world that Democrats are opposing tariffs when Democrats historically would have been more supportive of it, and Republicans are against? Republicans are supposed to be against protectionism. Like, conservatives historically have been against protectionism. And that's what this, I think, amounts to. I think what Trump's trying to do is create a protectionism so that we create more American jobs by having to sell more stuff here rather than importing from other places. I think that's what's in his mind, but I don't think that's going to work very well. Less than 2 weeks into his second term, Trump is upending the norms of how the United States is governed and interacts with its neighbors in the wider world. And that kind of thing is the kind of thing that plays into Putin's hands, right? Because that instability from the U.S. is not going to make it very easy for Europe and NATO to hang together. And Republicans welcome Trump's action, which I just can't understand. Like, Republicans, you were conservative. What happened to you? Industry groups and Democrats issued warnings about impact on prices. Who will suffer the most? American consumers, who will face skyrocketing prices. So Newsmax isn't condemning it; they're explaining it, but I don't see any outcry from either Fox or Newsmax or things along those lines, which is absolutely crazy to me. Now, Gary Kasparov pointed this out: the constant conflict is the point. To be a big boss, you have to have enemies. You have to tell your followers that only you can protect them, and I think there's a little bit of that dynamic at play. I don't know how much of that is there, but certainly some of that's at play. But the question is Trump doing this because he's trying to maybe has a protectionist idea about how to go about with the economy, or is he doing it because he's Putin's pawn, or does it just happen to flow together, or what exactly? I don't know. Okay, Chris Murphy, Democrat senator from Connecticut. He's not going to like anything the Trump administration does, but again, weirdly, I agree with him. This is hurting my head how much I'm agreeing with the Democrats here on these kind of things. Let me explain why the total destruction of U.S. aid happening as we speak matters so much. China, where Musk makes his money, U.S. aid wants U.S. aid destroyed. Now, USAID is like humanitarian assistance around the world. Now, I don't like how much money we spend, but generally speaking, we spend money in these kind of things, and it helps create friends and influence people, right? And so it's more money than I would like to spend, but at the same time, it's actually good to spend in many ways because it tamps down some nonsense that could be happening around the world. So I'm not an internationalist, but I understand the value within it. Okay, China, where Musk makes his money, so Musk doesn't like. Okay, so over the last week, 50% of Global Health Bureau and 60% of Humanitarian Assistance Bureau have been fired. Aid programs everywhere have been closed. The U.S. is in full retreat from the world. Now, pulling out of the WHO, if the WHO is dependent on the U.S., they're going to have some real significant problems. Now, the immediate consequences of this are cataclysmic. China will fill the void. Really? Is that what we want to do? We want to create a scenario where other countries are looking to China rather than to the U.S. for help and sustenance? As developing countries will now only be able to rely on China for help, they will cut more deals with Beijing to give them control of ports, critical mineral deposits, etc. So all kinds of bad things going to happen. Now, I agree with the basic premise that, maybe we shouldn't be paying as much as we do to these world organizations. Maybe other people need to stand up and pay up as well. But the way that we're doing this, I think, is kind of not going to work out so well. Okay, now you can confirm that when RT is tweeting out U.S. aid is dead, and they're happy about this. Jay and Key talking about how Kremlin is celebrating the destruction of America's centuries of soft power, while the vacuum left will be filled by Russia and China that are doing the exact opposite of Trump. So is that going to get us where we're trying to go? And I don't think the answer is yes. Okay, now let's turn our attention to Europe for the next big story. So since 2022, Britain's and the British Storm Shadow and the German Taurus production lines remain idle. Like, they provided these missiles, but they haven't been rebuilding them. The French have maintained Scalp production line running at about a little less than 100 units per year. But instead of ramping up, Europe relied on the United States. And this is part of the big problem that Trump is trying to fix, I think, but it's not. I'm not sure that this is the way to go about fixing it, but if you try to understand him as he sees him, that's how he would explain it. Instead of ramping up, Europe relied on the United States, but Biden slowed missile deliveries to Ukraine, and Trump may not restart them. So that puts us in a problem. Europe has to stand up at the same time and go, you know what? What if we have to do this alone? Like, we need to get ourselves on the proper footing. Okay, now, to throw some more monkey wrenches into the mix, you know that Orban in Hungary is the way he is, and you know that Fico in Slovakia is the way he is, both of them looking toward Russia. Well, former Czech Prime Minister, his party is vowing to stop shell purchases for Ukraine. The Czech opposition party, ANO, I don't know how you pronounce that, threatens to suspend the Prague-led ammunition initiative for Ukraine if it wins the October elections, risking vital supplies. So what the Czechs have been doing has been awesome. 1.5 million shells to Ukraine. He's saying he's going to cut it off if he wins. And so he would join Hungary and Slovakia in that. Okay. So NATO really needs to step up in a significant way. NATO is to discuss increasing defense spending to 3.5% of GDP soon, says Rutte. The NATO Secretary General confirms partners will decide on specific defense contribution details ahead of the June summit in The Hague. I can assure you, he says, it will be much more than 2%. Well, it shouldn't still be 2%. You're almost 3 years into the war in Ukraine, and a number of countries aren't even at 2% yet. This is absolutely crazy. Trump's national security advisor, Mike Waltz, says the U.S. will pressure European nations that don't increase defense spending. Quote, with the biggest conflict since World War II on the horizon, Europe must show commitment by raising spending to at least 5% of GDP. Wow. Okay. Got to keep going. Trump said on January 31st that he and Putin could talk soon and announce something significant toward ending the conflict in Ukraine. But if you have, okay, so here is John Herbst. He's a former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. And he says this, Putin, this is Igor Shushko summarizing for him. Putin will continue to have no interest in negotiating as he watches the circus unfold. The side that is desperate for negotiation always loses. So if we are too interested in getting there, it's going to be bad for Ukraine if we're pushing that too much. Okay, you want to do this in a measured way. Now, Igor Shushko again is talking about how Putin wants to wipe Ukraine off the face of this earth. Ukraine resists valiantly. How did the Kremlin manage to co-opt the White House into the exact plot to subvert Ukrainian leadership into societal cohesion that we warned about 2 months ago? Well, it appears that there is some kind of, the Russians are really pushing, and this is what he's saying. Now, this is sounding almost conspiratorial, like a psychological operation will be jointly executed by the FSB, GRU, and SVR against President Zelensky in the coming weeks. They will aim to discredit Zelensky in various ways and turn the Ukrainian population and Western leaders against him. Well, I mean, you're seeing some kind of little bit of this. The U.S. wants Ukraine to hold elections following potential ceasefire, Trump envoy says, and here he is. Before we get to that, here he is. Trump envoy Kellogg pushes for Ukrainian elections in 2025. Zelensky's potential main rival in the race, Poroshenko, is warning against holding elections under martial law, which could fracture unity. And here's Poroshenko talking about this right here. He's saying, don't do that.
Do you know what does it mean election now in Ukraine?
Ви знаєте, що означають вибори в Україні зараз? Вбивство єдності.
Because election is all the time fight.
Бо вибори – це завжди боротьба.
And unity cannot exist during the
А
election.
єдності не може бути під час.
An election is all the time fight and unity can't exist. So that's an interesting take. He understands that. Okay, so we must not amplify, let alone impose, Russian active measures against Ukraine. Pushing this election talk while Ukraine fights for national survival under martial law fractures societal unity. And constitutionally, it's not a legitimate thing. Now, Julia Davis is echoing this kind of thing. Here's what Russia hoped to get out of Trump's return in the Oval Office. Serdov opined that total internal breakdown in the United States was needed to overcome an otherwise incredibly strong system of government. Solyov expressed hope that Trump was exactly the kind of person who could deliver such a shock to the nation. Quote, when a person rolls in like an elephant in a china shop, like Trump, he tears down and aggravates the situation. He consolidates the opponents and supporters, prompting a confrontation, unquote. Military expert Alexander Atamanov concluded, quote, the worse, the better. It's beneficial for us. We'll put an end to the existence of the old world and start a new era, a new phase, headed by Russia, in my opinion. Concurring, Solyov recited a partial verse from Alexander Blok's poem, The 12, ominously predicting we'll set the world on fire. So all this talk here about this trade war and all these other crazy things that are going on, they matter. And they matter because if Julia Davis's understanding is correct, it's actually playing into Putin's hands. Now, is it a direct thing from Putin? I don't know. I can't see that. But apparently, Now, this is the most conspiratorial kind of thing here. So, warning, 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 warning. This sounds conspiracy theory, but I'm putting it out there because it's out there and so that you can understand context. Okay. Apparently, Julia Davis says, she's the lady behind the Russian media monitor, Trump wants to arrange a phony ceasefire with Putin. Russia always violates them. Pressure Ukraine into holding presidential elections and then dump the whole thing on Ukraine's next presidential administration. And she also tweeted this, Trump officials are debating whether to push for an initial ceasefire before trying to broker a more permanent deal if presidential elections were to take place in Ukraine. The winner could be responsible for negotiating a longer-term pact with Moscow. Okay, I don't know that there's evidence that that's the case. I mean, that is so. I can tell you the what that's happening. I can't necessarily tell you the why. This could be the why, but it could be something else. So take this with a huge grain of salt. I'm just telling you this is how some people are processing or thinking about it. Poroshenko doesn't want that to happen. Ukrainian law bans presidential and parliamentary elections during martial law. So, but there could be pressure to try to change that law. And, you know, the cost of getting this wrong and a Russian victory is going to cost $808 billion in the first 5 years, according to the American Enterprise Institute. I talked about that about a month ago, maybe a little longer than that. I think this came out back in November, that assessment. Okay, and even Putin's talking about how Trump will bring order here quite quickly. All of them, Europe, will soon be at their master's feet, gently wagging their tail. So Trump is being flattered by Putin. Putin's using this flattery to manipulate his way to being liked and trusted. He'll leverage whatever he can. Maybe that's why he's saying what he's saying. We'll see how that all plays out. Zelensky's warning that Ukraine's exclusion from any U.S.-Russian peace talks would be terrible. Rubio talked about how the war had set Ukraine back 100 years and it needs to end. Zelensky invited Rubio to visit and witness Russia's destruction and Kyiv's resilience firsthand. I think Rubio going there and being there would be a great, great step forward if Rubio is willing to do that. Now, with all that was said, I don't know whether this is, you know, Putin's pawn Trump, or Trump just being a bull in the china shop with his own agenda, or maybe it's just, you know, happens to fit together. I don't know. But this is the way that you should be thinking about it if you're trying to actually do something. And it's a different context, but Michael McCall, the representative from Texas, saying you can't negotiate or reason with terrorists because they only understand one thing: strength. That's why President Trump sent a clear message of deterrence and a language ISIS can understand. Anyone who attempts to harm the United States or its citizens will regret it. But it's focused at ISIS, but it needs to be focused at Russia to get them to stop doing what they're doing in Ukraine. Okay, you just have to apply that, but we're not applying that. So why aren't we applying that? I don't have the answers, but put it in the comments below, and I'm more than interested in hearing what you're thinking about that. I think this has been a very fair overview of what's going on. I hope that I was fair, trying to show you everything, but I'm leaving it to you to decide what's going on. I think I don't see evidence of Trump the pawn, but it might be. I don't see it. I do think that Trump wants to be the alpha in whatever context he's in, and I think that allies can work with that. But I just can't get the dumbest trade war in history, the tariffs. Like, I would have lost money on this. Republicans historically have been against protectionism, so this is just mind-numbing to me. Okay, Marko Milkelson, he is the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Estonian Parliament, posted this: 105 years ago today, by signing the Tartu Peace Treaty, Russia declared that it would respect the sovereignty of the Republic of Estonia forever. Those words were a deception, as 20 years later, the Soviet Empire occupied Estonia for half a century. If anyone believes that Russia is ready to honor treaties in Ukraine or elsewhere, then prepare for a great war. I think that's good advice. Now, I just posted this other video just now, and we have to ask ourselves, what would happen if we allow Russia to win? Like, what would happen if the West goes, you know what, we don't really want to do anything about this? And what will Russia do next if they are allowed to win in Ukraine? This was someone associated with the ISW just unpacking that, and it's a great question, and we need to wrestle with that. What will happen if Russia is allowed to prevail in Ukraine? All right. that would probably be the next thing that you should watch if you haven't watched it already. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.